I would like to thank you, Michael O'Malley, for being here from the Yale Medical School. Some of you already met Michael on Monday, so I think that is something that you can go deeper with him. Today we discuss again about the evolution of leadership. I asked Michael to provide his perspective about how the leadership concept is evolving over time, the changes, and specifically to have a focus on the assessment of leadership, because he created an interesting startup recently. A startup is called Leadership Mosaics, and the startup also generated some kind of game, a very interesting, intriguing game with cards, and Michael will describe also the history behind this. In order to assess leaders, Michael worked worldwide with international companies, with CEO, entrepreneurs, managers at different levels. And the idea today is to understand a different approach of assessment of leadership behaviors, but also to understand how to develop leadership over time. So during the course, we approach to leadership development from different angles. Now we are curious to know about the perspective of Michael based on his experience, long experience in doing research and consulting activity in a different kind of setting. So Michael, thank you so much for being here. I upload your presentation. Wait, give me just one second. If it works, because sometimes we have problem with the connection here. Okay. Wait. Okay, we are here. We have, and wait. So guys, be always open to raise your hand, ask question. It's an opportunity for you to have these scholars, these practitioners in your class. Try to benefit of his presence and his expertise. The floor is yours, the power is yours, and also the microphone.
No. Those are for questions.
I can stay here if you want.
Yeah, that would be great. We'll just switch here so I can. Okay. All right. Can you hear me okay? Okay, good. Well, in 3 years, I'll be able to give this talk in Italian. I've been taking Italian for 3 years. I'm, intermediate level, but I'm 3 years away from fluency.
And it's strange that we have in this week all speakers who love Italy, American guys who love, and are learning Italian. So yesterday we have another speaker, Timothy O'Connell. He has been living here for many, many years, but he also speaks Italian and English fluently. And so you are learning Italian too.
I'm getting there. My other half is Mancini. So my grandparents were born here in Molise. So I've tried to put together a talk. I know that I wanted to do two things. One is introduce you to this concept of leadership. So that's kind of where we're heading today. But also for those of you who attended the seminar on Monday, I didn't want to be totally redundant with that. So there's some new information in here. And then plus I didn't want to cover ground that Dr. Beneso has already covered with you this year. So I tried to include material that maybe you haven't been familiarized with quite yet.
Guys, do you hear? Okay.
Okay. So that's good. But I want to thank you for having me. I want to thank the university. I've had a great time in Venice so far, and I've got some more days ahead of me. So at any rate, so I want to start with, and please ask questions. If a question, I have prepared statements, but if a question comes to you, just raise your hand and wait for the mic to come around and ask your question. And I think that would make a more fruitful afternoon or morning. So let me, got it. I could, yeah, that's easier. So where we're heading is I want to introduce you to this new concept of leadership, but I have some preliminary ideas and thoughts and introductory comments on leadership in general that I want to acquaint you with first. And one is that I hope that I'll say something that resonates with you today, but leadership everything I say should be familiar to you in some way, because leadership is about human relations. And so if I say something that seems unintelligible or foreign, somehow, I've sort of missed the point, because all of leadership is really about how we relate to one another. And we use the term leadership really in a business. So you're a leader in business, but we occupy leadership positions throughout our lives and all over. So teachers are leaders in the classroom, priests are leaders in the church, boat captains are leaders on water, parents are leaders at home. So leadership is everywhere and ultimately grounded in familiar things. But I do want to skip ahead just for a moment and just comment on that, because I think a lot of what leadership is communicating the familiar, but maybe in unfamiliar ways. So I'm going to make some allusions to art today. I happen to like art. I think the overlap between leadership and art is substantial. This is actually pulled from a piece by Bruce Nauman, who had a piece called "The True Artist is an Amazing Luminous Fountain," but the words were written on a translucent sheet and hung over a window. And so the idea behind it, and I just said, just apply the same thing to leadership. The true leader is an amazing luminous fountain, with the idea of that you're looking outdoors and seeing what's already there. So to some extent, what you're doing is you're just looking at the familiar, but in a different kind of way. So having this sheet over the window, you're seeing what has already been there, but it forces you to look at it in a different way. And I think leadership is like that. It takes very familiar, great leadership is like that. It allows you to see things in a new way that it uplifts and inspires and motivates, etc. So it takes the familiar and molds it in a particular or peculiar way. And a lot of the things that I've learned over time are things that are very sensible, that have resonated with me. I've done lots of interviews of CEOs over the year, and one of them that I recall was with a fellow by the name of Pete Peterson, who started the Blackstone Group, which was the largest pay equity at one point company in the world. And I interviewed him many times, and I got to know him, a very nice man. And I said, well, life must be very complicated for you, a lot of trade-offs, a lot of things going on. He says, it's not complicated. I just ask myself, what's the right thing to do? And that simplifies everything. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Do the right thing, which is right. I mean, it's sensible and it's familiar and it makes a lot of sense, but it just took somebody else to say it to sort of put it into perspective. What I'm going to argue today is that leadership is undefinable. It's not relative. It's not whatever you want it to be, but you'll never be able to pin it down completely. You'll never come up with a definition that captures leadership in its entirety. Every definition that you strive to have will be too narrow, it will be too wide, there'll be a lot of exceptions, and you can think of counterexamples. And so I have a new way for you to think about how we get around sort of the undefinability of leadership. It doesn't mean that people haven't tried. There's hundreds of attempted definitions out there. The other thing is I want to say that leadership is difficult to measure, and there are lots of reasons for that. One is that there's a lot of things that that we don't associate with leadership that a lot of leaders do every day, but that people interpret as good leadership, and they should, because there are things like a leader being available and having an open door policy and asking someone how their day is going or what they're working on, or sitting with, having a cup of coffee with staff members in the morning. These are all real examples of what employees have told me over the years that have made them feel regarded in a particular way, as valuable and as seen, as heard, as wanted. So there are all these little things that are hard to measure, but are important for leaders to do. Repeating messages over and over again, so that the values of the company, the mission, its goals, its directives, and so forth. All of these things add up to leadership. We're going to be looking at some big things today. The other is that, how I think of myself as a leader and how you would think of me as a leader are going to differ, right? So people have different perspectives and interpretations on certain behaviors, and probably, and then even within, different people have different perspectives on leadership and evaluate it differently. So, for instance, you have the famous Dunning-Kruger effect, where low performers see themselves as, or poor managers see themselves as better managers than good leaders see themselves as. So if you're a good leader, you have high standards and you think you're falling short. If you're a poor leader, you have low standards and think you're excelling or doing better than that. So it's difficult. It's difficult to measure. This is one of those areas that I've grappled with. It's like, how do you get a reliable measure of leadership? And I think my most recent thinking on this, I'm picking up from a Scott philosopher, David Hume, who gives the example of two experts drinking from a bottle of superior wine, and one of the experts saying, "Oh, it tastes like leather," and the other one saying it tastes metallic, and then people laughing at the experts because this is a supreme bottle of wine. How could it taste like that to you? But when the bottle is empty, they discover that at the bottom of the bottle is an iron key and a leather sort of tassel. And so they had what Hume had called the delicacy of taste. And so I'm thinking, and the delicacy of taste comes through experience, having acquaintance, in our case, with many kinds of different leaders, being able to make comparisons, and then being unbiased in your judgment. So in the future, I'm thinking of asking reviewers, how many leaders have they had? Have some of them been bad? Have some of them been good? How many books on leadership have you read? Just to see what the range of their experience is and maybe weight them appropriately. And then finally, I'm just going to say that, I think we can do much better in creating leaders of our future and developing them. I think the one surefire way of increasing productivity and GDP and making people's lives better is to improve the quality of leadership in organizations. So I'm just going to take you on just a quick tour. This is my, we'll look at the, at that side. I'm going to concentrate on the right side of the screen and just do a quick tour through sort of leadership history. First of all, I want to premise my comments by saying that leadership understandings have changed over time, but it's not like the wholesale replacement. We're going to throw out that idea and introduce a whole new way of thinking of leadership. It's just that the times and circumstances create different emphases in how we view things. But we don't throw out everything. So for instance, these days bureaucracy has if you say the word bureaucracy, that has a negative implication of red tape and hierarchy and so forth, but we still retain elements of bureaucracy in formalization of policies and procedures, standardization of work tasks and so forth. So we haven't gotten rid of bureaucracy, but it isn't a staple of organizational thinking these days. Well, no organization that I know of aspires to be a bureaucracy, even though they have elements that they still have. So what's interesting is, in the old days, guilds and closely held companies by families was sort of the rule, and the nexus between family and work was very close. My Italian-born grandfather was a shoemaker, and he had his shoe shop in the home. And so those things were intertwined. But with the Industrial Revolution, that home and work really created a schism. Men went off to work, women, for the most part, stayed at home. And there's been some interesting reviews of values in the workplace, and they would contend that things like kindness shifted, where things like values like compassion and kindness, which were embedded sort of in the work-family nexus, were separated. So you were kind at home, so tending to the hearth, but at work there was a different set of values. And the values that sort of supplanted that tended to be regulated by our new views of a clockwork universe. It was a very mechanistic point of view. So Leibniz and Descartes had this view that, and remember, at this time, this is when, during the Enlightenment, with astronomy and physics, things are regulated by certain laws that all fit together like a clock. And so you had things like scientific management then that came along, where people became like pieces, more or less, of these time motion studies that fit in to the assembly line process. They were sort of parts in this, intricate system of production. And that actually, scientific management endured for a while, up until, say, World War I. And at that point, people started, a couple of things were happening, not only in the United States, but around the world. There was a lot of employee-employer strife occurring at this time. And there were, in the United States, in the early 1900s, there were troops called in. Workers were killed in some cases. There was one particular case that dramatically changed sentiment in the United States called the Ludlow Massacre, where, unbeknownst to the troops, a striking set of workers had their families and children with them in the 10 cities, and the troops actually killed the children, the wives, the workers, and sentiment changed. But people at this time were starting to say, we're sending people off to this war, and yet we're not giving them a say in how they should regulate their own behavior in the workplace. Shouldn't we have a more democratic process? Shouldn't we be more participatory? Shouldn't we give people a voice? And it was really around this time that people like Kurt Lewin were doing studies that showed that democratic or participatory management styles actually led to greater productivity than more directive, controlling, autocratic styles. And then, of course, there are the famous Hawthorne studies, which I only partially believe, because, are you familiar with the Hawthorne studies? Have you? It was a commission study by in the 1930s and 40s by a lighting company that wanted to know if the effects of lighting, if lights affected worker productivity. Remember, factories were not electrified until the 1930s and 40s, and so they were keen to know what the effect of the environment on people. Well, what Hawthorne concluded was that no, the lights didn't have any effect, which is very hard to believe, because every study since then has shown that environmental factors have a profound effect on productivity. But what they argued for was a human relations argument, that it was really manager attention and support that led to differences between groups in productivity. So, so at that point, really the idea of participatory management and employee voice really started to grow. And that sort of evolved into work that was being, as production processes were changing, people such as Eric Trist, who was working with coal mines in England, found that rather than doing production work, one person, one task, he found that autonomous groups that would form, could cross-train each other, could regulate their own schedules, assign people work, were actually more effective in productivity than the old piece management process. So group relations and quality circles started to take hold at this time as another form of participatory management. And Deming at this point was doing his work in Japan and showing that quality circles improved quality, which later other countries emulated and so forth. They were overused, I have to say. I think I saw that in the 1980s. I saw a figure like it's a very high figure. 80 to 90% of companies in the Fortune 500 said that they were using quality circles, and probably some that really didn't. I mean, it was the thing to do at that particular time. But slowly what happened is that in the late 50s, Hertzberg in particular wrote a book on man in the workplace, where he introduced the concept that there are these different kinds of motivational factors. There are hygiene factors, there are motivational factors, and we've only been attending to the fact that people respond to external things like the provision of safety and pay. And remember, at this time too, throughout the world, operant condition, B.F. Skinner, behaviorism was really taking hold. And the idea here was that you could get people to do whatever you wanted them to do simply through the manipulation of rewards and punishments. And so when Hertzberg came along and said, no, there's this interior life of people that you often have to attend to, things like autonomy and meaning are important as well. People were actually shocked at the time, and his book originally it's funny how a lot of new ideas are not accepted. There's another one coming up, emotional intelligence, which wasn't accepted at first either, was sort of rejected. But now, gradually, since Hertzberg's book, I think leadership, by and large, has become more interior or internal focused. You're looking at sort of the quality of people's lives, and leadership is more responsive to those aspects of employees than ever before. So, things like emotional intelligence came out, and this, like I said, was another concept that was rejected. The two people who actually came up with the idea, Jack Mayer and Peter Salovey, well, I heard Peter Salovey talk, because he is at Yale, recently, and he said his paper hadn't been cited for 5 years. So the original paper on emotional intelligence sort of just laid there without any notice for 5 years, until somebody called Daniel Goleman came around and wrote a book on the concept. And then more and more people were willing to accept it. And then we moved into the positive psychology realm with, people really focused on happiness and subjective well-being and satisfaction with life and work-family, sort of integration and those sorts of things. And then today, I think we're sort of focused. It's very hard to find a leadership article today without the word digital in it, or agile, or rapid results, or change, or sustainability. So today we're focused more on, fast, flexible, sustainable. And what's interesting is, like, even sustainable, which seems new to us, is not really a new concept, because in the 17th century, William Harvey discovered blood flow through the system. What he discovered is our circulatory system, and he said, oh, our blood flows through our system, it's pumped by the heart, our body takes nutrients from it, and then the blood is replenished and circulates again. So he described this circular renewal process. An economist, burgeoning economist at the time, said, you know, our economy could work like that. Our homes could work like that, where you actually take resources, you fabricate them in some way, you sell them, but at the same time, you could renew the materials that you're using and recycle them back through. So households can be self-renewing. So sustainability and this sort of virtuous cycle isn't new, but today we need to attend to it on a much more global scale. So like I said, the concept, so what we emphasize changes with the times, but sort of the root or the underlying dimensions of leadership pretty much stay in focus. And today, because companies come and go so quickly, we have to be, speed is of the essence. And so obviously a recent study showed the half-life of companies today, new public companies, is 10 years, which means that all companies form and that go public will dissolve, will be gone within 10 years. So that's a very, versus, in the old days, a company was around for decades, but that has eroded. So the ability to take in, and I was reminded of this by reading Dr. Beneso's book, the idea of absorptive capacity is very essential. The ability to take in information unfiltered, to have it stored and people react to it very quickly in a distributed way will be necessary for future success. I think but a lot of how you lead and how one leads is really contingent on what you think the purpose of business is. It's really dependent on how we conceptualize it. So if you think the purpose of business is to make money and that's its sole purpose, then I think you'll lead in one way. If you think it's to improve the welfare of people within the company, the local community, the global community, you'll lead in quite a different way. And it's like Thomas Kuhn in his book, The Structure of Scientific Revolution, said, if you think the world is flat, you're going to act one way. And if you think it's round, you're going to act in quite another way. And so it really gets back to the way you lead and the way you regard people and how you think of them really depends on your conception of leadership and how they fit in sort of to the, into the business format. So there is a Spanish, I just put this out here. There's a a Scott philosopher, Alistair McIntyre, who is I would classify him as maybe a hopeful skeptic of capitalism, but he actually, in one of his books, gives the example of a fishing crew. And he said, can you imagine two different fishing crews? One which he thought would mimic the modern organization, where profitability is the sole goal. And he said, so then you would attend to things like efficiency and KPIs and personal rewards and things of that notion, versus a fishing crew that you conceptualized as a part of, embedded in the larger community. You're serving buyers of your fish, you're satisfying the needs of the local community through it. People are helping with each other to become better, to hone their skills, etc. And you're more attentive to the sustainability of fishing practices. You would lead much differently, he would argue, in those two scenarios. You might be more directive under one, and you might be more participative under the other, for example. So it all begins with sort of how are you thinking about things? What do you value? What's most important here? As a CEO once said to me when I was interviewing them, he said, everybody knows that air and water is important. We need those, but that's not our purpose, so to make the sort of the jump to, so yes, we need to make money. Everybody knows that, but our purpose is to help people live more fulfilling lives. This is a real company, and it's a fairly substantial company. So yes, everybody knows that corporations, at least for-profit ones, are money-making enterprises, but it's like air and water. These are things that we need, but it doesn't have to be our purpose. And if we define our purpose differently, then we can perhaps lead in a different kind of way. So I think there is a strong undercurrent these days around having healthy organizations, and that concept has sort of evolved over time, and I think partly spurred by surveys that showed that people in general were not. Only 20% of people felt like they were flourishing, and that means able to fulfill their capabilities, their inherent capabilities and their talents, and participate in their local communities and work productively. And these are things that would, and these are all attributes that would sustain the durability of companies over time. And then the American Psychological Association came along and said, well, and defined what a healthy organization should look like. And they said it should promote personal development, emotional health, and provide safety. And then the MacArthur Foundation came along and actually defined what elements were necessary to have those things, like open communications, participatory decision-making, a bevy of programs that secured people safety and economic security and those sorts of things. So when I first started in academia and consulting back in the 80s, it was very popular for this. If you've heard of the Baldrige Award, it's still around, I understand, but in the 80s, people were like, everyone wanted to win this award. It's kind of a fake award, because all you had to do is demonstrate you had programs that corporate programs that responded to employee development, economic security, and so forth. You didn't actually have to execute them necessarily, but demonstrate that you had them available. They're still around, but so anyway, I think there's a growing awareness among entrepreneurs and younger CEOs that there's more to this than profitability. So what I have here for your record edification, I've just pulled out a host of definitions of various, that different people have argued.
You already studied this during the course, so just a summary.
I'm not even going to summarize it. What I did was I went through these definitions and I did a little word cloud and just pulled out certain words which, so leaders, have, vision and value, and they motivate and mobilize and that sort of thing. But before we get, before we attribute magnificence to leaders and minimize the work of managers, I did want to say a few things about distinguishing between leaders and managers, and which is a distinction that writers often make, but it's not as profound as you might imagine. So, and here's a place where it actually does sort of parallel the arts as well. So during the Enlightenment period, people started carving up subject matter. It's pretty much the subject matter we have now in our universities, but in the arts, they were divided into something called the servile or the vulgar arts and the fine arts. And the fine arts were things like painting and sculpture and things like that, where supposedly people were not bound by any sort of structure or plans. They were free to think all these wonderful thoughts and create, and create. Whereas people in the servile now or mechanical arts, artisans had to create according to a certain plan, and these were like weavers and glass blowers and woodworkers and things of that ilk. So we went to the Orsoni plant the other day, and there is no, which makes those glass mosaics, and there's no shortage of creativity in the work of artisans. And you would be wrong to think that the work of leaders is always to think, these great strategic thoughts and not worry about execution and some of the sort of so-called menial tasks that others have to attend to. So artisans are in fact creative. Leaders do these other things. The separation between managers and leaders is not qualitative, it's more quantitative. Managers are expected to do more executional things because that's the nature of their job, and their job isn't to think strategically, but over time and with incremental development and opportunities to manage groups that get larger and more complex over time, they do develop. They do acquire more of the things that we'll talk about that leaders do have and are expected to do. But I do want to say that I want to give a shout out to middle managers, because these are the people who do make it. You do want creative middle managers, because they are the people who take sort of the vision, the strategy, and make it real. And I often think of it as an orchestra where you have a conductor and you have the musicians. If you have only so-so musicians, you're going to have a so-so musical work, no matter what the composer or the orchestra conductor does. So you want people who are virtuosos as managers. And I just put in here, it was typical actually in one period during a classical period of music. And somebody told me, somebody who was a musician in a recent seminar, workshop that I did, that they still do, some composers still do that. They leave certain parts of their compositions blank and allow the musician to improvise that particular section before sort of rejoining the orchestra and so forth. So you want people who are creative and who can improvise in middle management. Okay, so now I want to get on to, so that's some historical perspective on leadership, but I want to get into sort of how I got to where we are and sort of, how I think about leadership. Believe it or not, it really started with, I was fascinated as an undergraduate by one question, and that is, what is art? And believe it, and I'll make the leap here. So I studied about, I've been consumed by the question of what makes art good, what allows you to say this particular piece is better than this other piece, and so forth. And a lot of theorists have come up with theories, just like leaders have come up, and pundits have come up with different theories of leadership, none of which really work in completion. And then there's this school that said, well, why don't we just give up on the idea of definitions altogether? Why don't we think about this differently? And Ludwig Wittgenstein had this idea of family resemblances. That is, there are certain concepts out there. He uses games as an example in his philosophical investigations. He says, we have all kinds of games, right? There are card games, there are different kinds of sports, there's, at any rate, there's all kinds of different games. And you know that they're games because they share certain resemblances to one another. So if you compiled, this list, you would say what's common among them all. You would say that they're all games and that they share some similarities. They're not exactly alike, but we know they're similar because they have certain attributes. So that's how I think about leadership. It's like you can't define it, but but leaders should have some similar attributes or criteria that you use to evaluate them. You don't necessarily have to have them all, but if you want to be good, you should have some of them. So it's like going to like a movie, and you walk out of the movie house with your friends, and you're debating, oh, did you like the movie or not? And you render an opinion, but that opinion is based typically on a set of criteria. You know, the plot, the character, the costumes, the music, all of these things play into, there's a set of attributes that you use to make your evaluation. And a part of that evaluation also hinges on what is it that the movie maker was trying to do. Was this supposed to be a deep movie, that made you think, or was it just to entertain you? And so you would apply these criteria in different ways depending on the purposes involved. So the question then is, and this is the part where you talk. This is part of the. So the question is, what? I didn't want to do that. What are the criteria? What criteria would you use? And wait for the little microphone to come around. What criteria would you use to say whether or not a leader is good or not? What attributes would you use, or what behaviors? I think of these as behaviors. So think of these as big, enduring behaviors. What would you expect a quality leader to demonstrate?
Where is the microphone? Okay.
It's back there. Yes. Okay. Somebody's got to somebody's got to volunteer.
Okay, Sophie.
All right. We have a volunteer.
Well, I'm thinking in some kind of interpersonal behavior, like the space of regulating both themselves and others. This kind of emotional handling others and their own emotions in some way. And there's different ways of doing that, but being able to regulate the emotional environment that you're working in a way to drive better performance and better team dynamics.
Okay, thank you. And that leads to, I'm just going to step back for 1 second here and really give you an overview of kind of different components of leadership as I see. So you're right. So, you have these sort of interpersonal skills that you want, and that makes for a more satisfying environment rather than having, like people yell at you or throw things at you or demean you in public. I mean, that undermines, sort of the satisfaction that people can sort of derive from the workplace. So certainly that is one element of it. So I break this model up into the 1, 2, and 3 parts. One is like leadership behaviors. It's the kinds of behaviors that they demonstrate or do over sort of a prolonged period of time. Leadership traits, the kinds of sort of personal attributes people have that sort of enable the expression of those certain behaviors. And then I have these things called practices. There are things like was just mentioned, things that you do every day, your responses to crises, your responses to somebody's conflict, how you respond to somebody's question about a market or a product. These are the things that are everyday occurrences that one way or another you have to respond to. And I like this. I like the concept. There's a Chinese concept of mo, which means to brush up against. These are all the ways people brush up against each other every day and signify to you as a receiver of these brushes whether or not you're valued and worthwhile, and whether or not this kind of relationship that you're engaged in is worth sustaining or not. So that's one. So yes, so the interpersonal dimension is certainly important, and it produces, a certain reaction in followers, employees, that make the workplace more pleasurable or not. Yes, we got one.
I'd say how other people react to the leader, which is probably connected to behaviors. Um, I don't think you're a leader just because you have like the label of the leader, but it's really your behavior. So people should be interested in following you because you're inspiring and you're treating them like you're inviting them to do things and not just because you need to be followed.
Yes. So so a couple of things there. One, and I think you hit on one of the important behaviors in being inspirational. And I think, by the way, we use the word leader too loosely. We associate leader with the position, and assume that because you occupy this position, you're in a leadership role. But I think that is a very sort of narrow, and I'm not even sure if I would use the word leader in that particular case, because there's so much more to it. So I think your statement has two things. One is that is this person worthy of attending to because of who they are? And are they inspiring? Do they actually get you excited about what you're doing? So that would be. So thank you for that. So Dr. Benet, so they all get extra credit if they speak up, did you say? Like, thank you. He was my ace in the seminar too.
Yes. Hello again. Thank you for the seminar. Yes. So visionary, I would say this is very important. They need to have a vision, something forward. They feel attached to. They feel like they can achieve. That way, through that they can inspire their team, people who are near them, around them, their followers, their members, to go to that vision and to make that vision a possibility, a reality. So visionary, I would say, is really important.
Thank you. I think without a vision, work becomes very transactional, right? If you don't know if you don't have anything meaningful or purposeful that you're working toward, then what you're doing is coming in every day and just doing stuff, right? It's just very transactional. So we're going to have 10 criteria, 10 behaviors. And for the most part, I think, I've always said that they're not necessary and sufficient, meaning that you could have any of them. But the one that I think might be necessary is vision, because when you evaluate a leader, you say, well, is this leader any good? You really automatically want to know, well, what are they trying to do? What is it they're trying to achieve? So there has to be something against which you kind of measure sort of all of their actions against. Well, how close are you? How far have you moved the organization? Where are you moving it to? So vision. Hey, we're doing well here. So satisfaction, employee vision, inspiration. What else? They get out of the final exams and all of that, right? If they speak. We got it. Okay. Thank you.
Definitely I agree, especially with Ali. One thing that have not been mentioned is the fact that a leader also has to be bold at times, being able to, like, having clear the idea that it cannot be liked by everyone. Certain decisions are tough to be made, and there might be repercussions sometimes. So also being ready for that, being ready for repercussion, and again, for not being liked, taking decisions that are not shared by everyone, and ultimately also being able to accept defeat, not being open to it at all costs, but still being able to be resilient against eventual losses.
Yes, yeah. So, having this element uh, of decisiveness, being able to, not analyze ad nauseum, but being able to make decisions. This is particularly important, by the way, when you become a new leader in an organization. You have this sort of grace period that people allot you, like 3 months, where it gives you time to sort of talk to people, figure things out, and so forth. But typically, people are very expectant and hopeful that things will be fine, things will improve, and that sort of thing. And that really requires the leader at some point to demonstrate that they're able to get things done and make decisions. So the worst thing you can do after a certain period of time is nothing. So decisiveness would be a part of that. Else? Tell me, let me go forward here and I'll show you my list of the 10 behaviors. You're not wrong with some of these things. Sometimes, like we're going to look at traits momentarily. And the traits sometimes are, the association between traits and behaviors are very close. I made decisions to separate them out. So in alphabetical order, not in any kind of rank order of importance, what I've argued for is that a good leader will align all the elements of the company so that he or she is conveying a unified message about what is most important within the company. So you'll see in your business books that alignment typically means aligning structure and people and technologies and so forth, so that in the reward system, so that they all sort of make sense together and there's no sort of discontinuities among those. More simply, I think of it, you have to align sort of the technology to the people so that people are able to exercise within sort of the constraints of the business without making errors or mistakes and that sort of thing. You have to be able to build a team, and that is not only within your, if you're a part of the executive group, be a part of a team and build, sort of the top management group, but build sort of, a cohesive framework within, all of your staff. So team building. Enlighten, which really means getting people to think about themselves, getting others to think about themselves in a particular way, has a lot to do with the ethics of leadership. Is like, how do you want to, if you did this, how do you want to regard yourself as a person? How do you want to think about yourself in your sort of daily actions? And I think good leaders, great leaders, actually get people to reflect on who do you want to be? How do you want to think about yourself? What does that imply for your everyday behaviors and so forth? In visions, this gets at the vision question, and that is to have a sort of a distal perspective. It's typically these distal perspectives are unachievable, but they're sort of purposeful, meaningful goals that you persistently strive toward. Habitat for Humanity, for example, wants to have housing for everyone. Yeah, and so they're never going to have housing for everyone, but but that's what they're trying to do, and they're progressively moving toward that. Focuses, a good leader keeps people focused on what's important and concentrated on those things that have value, and try to get you to not go off on a tangent and attend to things that are secondary or just simply unimportant to things. And they help you sort of define what those priorities are. This is important, this is not. This is where we're going, this isn't. Imagine, you would expect a good leader to have a pretty wholesome imagination so that they can sort of think ahead and think of products and services, et cetera, in new and different ways. I think one of the hardest, imagination is, there is a one of the hardest things to do is to imagine sort of a future that hasn't taken place yet and that you don't really need. So you don't really need to change, but it might. There's an Estonian folktale that goes like, it's called The Spoon. Maybe you've heard it. Anyway, a girl goes to sleep and she dreams of going to a party. And when she gets to the party in her dream, she finds all these other people having a great time and eating cake and ice cream and things like that. But she can't participate in the party because she did not bring a spoon. And so the next night, when she goes to bed, she has a spoon and she puts it under her pillow so that in the event she returns to the party, she'll be well equipped to eat the ice cream and cake and participate with the other people in the party. But the whole idea of the spoon, which in psychology became the spoon test, is are you able to imagine a circumstance where you're prepared for some future state that you don't really need right now and in this place? And so one of the hardest things for a leader to do is say, well, we don't need it now, but I imagine a future where we will. And if we don't move now, we might not be able to afford. I might not have the spoon later on, and I might not be able to respond or eat the cake and ice cream. So I have to do this now when it's not even necessary. It's one of the hardest things for any leader to be able to try to do. It inspires, as we talked about, and one of the things that it's easier to inspire others when you're inspired yourself. So you should think about what inspires you and what gets you excited. So yesterday I went to one of your art museums. I love to go to art museums, and because I get ideas from them. And there is something called the museum effect, which makes you, as you look at art, it gets you to reflect on yourself and different aspects of your world and meaning and things like that. But I get inspired by it. And I thought, oh, I want to be like I want to be able to do this. And then I get these feeds through Yale where somebody has discovered a new molecule or has a animal cure for, a cure for cancer. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is so exciting. So, you got to find ways to excite yourself if you're going to get other people excited as well. So inspiration. Intellectually engages, and that really has to do with really using people's sort of intellect, problem-solving skills, engaging them in the process of helping you figure things out. And companies do this, by the way, in different ways. Just simply asking people questions and having expectations that they'll solve problems. But, I've been in engineering companies, for instance, where they have little experiments set up around a fan company. I still remember this. The name of the company was Big Ass Fans. They made these huge fans. They now make them for homes, but they used to make them for barns that kept like cattle cool. But they would have aerodynamic experiments set up all over with people watching and monitoring it. So they were expected to figure out the best way of doing certain things. So at any rate, they invited people to figure it out because they had the experiments set up all over the workplace. Satisfies really gets to what we talked out of front, and that is, it's not only how you're treating employees, but it's also, are you attending to the basic needs and fundamental needs of people? Basic needs would be, basic needs for, food, security, safety, those sorts of things. But other needs that I'm sure you're familiar with through like Maslow and other theorists, for autonomy and meaning and things and belonging and feeling accomplished and growth. These are the things that matter most to people. And if you're not supplying those elements in the workplace, or at least attending to them, well, you're not going to get very far. And then you have certain skills. Now there are I mean, you have to have capabilities, and that grows over time. You learn you learn your technical skills, you learn functional skills, you learn how an organization or an industry operates, and so it accumulates over time. But you have to demonstrate that you're skilled. There are two things that I did not mention, and again, I'd like to get your thoughts on this. One, I think, is pretty clear cut, and that is you're not going to be seen as a quality leader unless you can demonstrate competence, right? And so unless you know what you don't have to know everything, and particularly in this day and age with technological developments and so forth, you're not going to know everything, but you have to have some pretty sturdy capabilities about and ideas about how things work to be regarded as an effective leader. We do make the mistake often, magazines do this all the time when they announce sort of the best leaders of the year. The best leaders of the year usually are those that have gotten the best results, but you always want to ask, but what did they do? What did they do that allows me to say that this was their achievement? Because it's really a false inference, right? If you're a good leader, you get results. It got results, so therefore you're a good leader. No, you could have gotten results by cheating on your accounting, or riding the wave of a market surge, or being an industry that is doing well because of environmental circumstances. Nothing you did really made a difference. All you did was ride the wave. So it has to be something that you can point to that demonstrates that you did achieve something. The other thing not on my list per se, we're going to look at personality traits, but character overall. But I do want to say that character is important, because what character does, it allows you to either approach or avoid leaders. That is, if you had people who are seemly in some way or untoward, or they're just not likable for some reason, or worse, detestable, then you're really not going to attend to their message very well, because who they are will always get in the way of what they're trying to say. You just can't get over the fact that this person is something that is unfavorable. And in the art world, we might take an example of like a Gauguin painting. Actually, to be honest with you, the one that's used in the art world all the time is Leni Riefenstahl, who did the documentaries of Hitler. And she is like credited with being sort of the mother of documentary filmmaking. She was the first one that went out of order. So apparently she did all these wonderful things with documentaries. But can you watch this documentary without being sort of nauseated both by the topic, and can you actually herald her as an expert without thinking that you were actually trying to manipulate us through this cutting edge documentary? So who a person is and what, all the things surrounding their character can sort of damage the message. So those are two things. So I wanted to can I even read that? No, I got it. No, I got it. I turned my phone off, so I don't know what time it is. So I just want to know how much. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. So,
Hi guys, when you finish the class, you can also have a look at the game, physical game, because we have also the digital game that some of you did for the seminar on Monday, but also Mike brought here also the physical, the cards with the different elements that constitute what is explaining so far.
So I really wanted to, we talked about measurement at first, and a lot of the problems that I have found with leadership measurement over the years, particularly with rating scales and so forth, people are reluctant to use the full range of the scale. when you have multiple raters, and somebody says like the person's like an 80 on this attribute or 40 on the other, I was reluctant to say, well, 60, the average, doesn't convey anything to me either. I'm not sure if an average really is good. So we wanted a process that was fun, that people could accept and not become non-defensive over, and that would sort of welcome as a way to express their strengths and developmental needs, sort of in a friendly, non-judgmental way. And so that's where we came up with the way of visualizing leadership using these cards, some of which you saw if you went in and looked at the online assessment, but here are the other ones. So the idea for this comes from Italy. I will tell you the brief story. I was in Sirmione last year, and well, maybe about a year and a half ago. It was off season, and and I think I was the only one staying in this boutique hotel, and so I got to know all the staff and so forth. And I get these, like I said, these updates from Yale, and I sitting around with their staff, just chit-chatting. And I said, oh, look, Yale has 56 of the original tarot cards from Milan that were found in a well. And they said, oh, yeah, we know all about, the tarot cards and so forth. And we started discussing it. And I started to think, well, the original tarot cards were typically commissioned by wealthy families to tell a story about their family and to justify or rationalize their sort of existence as the leaders of a particular community, like Florence or Milan or so forth. So it was actually to reinforce sort of their status in the community as leaders of that community. And I thought, well, we could use leadership. We could actually tell a story visually through leadership using the same mechanism. Now, all the cards have been changed to reflect leadership attributes, like the 10 behaviors that we just discussed, the 15 traits that I'm going to show you momentarily. But I was insistent on keeping one of the cards in our deck, and that's the Fool card. And the tarot cards have a Fool card in it. And the reason I wanted to keep the Fool card is because in the Middle Ages, the Fool, wearing motley attire, dressed in these like patchwork clothes, the Fool was the one person who could step outside society's role and dress in whichever manner they liked and say whatever they liked to whomever they liked. So they were excluded from the norms and roles that governed everybody else. And so I used the Fool to say, are you able to step outside? Are you able to step outside of your business role as a leader and consider sort of the wider perspective or point of view of the social and moral community to which you belong? Can you consider other things other than what I call here the bottom line mentality, which are people who are strenuously focused only on generating profitability? Are you able, through your decision-making process, not exclusively, not ignore the money-making process, but at least include in that decision-making process that there are people who have other interests, and that you should explore those as a part of your decision-making process, as a part of a social and moral and environmental community when you make your decisions, because that would be the only way to become, a wise leader. So I retained the Fool card in the packet. Let's just move on. I just wanted to say here is that a lot of times a lot of the times the people who want to become, and it really gets at at least what I want a leader who will be the fool, who will actually consider the broader community in the, in their decisions. Often the people who become leaders aren't those people. The people who often raise their hands and say, I want to lead, or who are doing all the sort of the political things to position themselves for leadership roles, often turn out not to be very good leaders. There was a recent study that showed that, and often what we do in organizations, you take the highest producing or the best, most productive person, like salesperson, and they're the ones that get promoted. And what they looked at was, what happens when you do that? And what they find is that the most productive person in an individual contributor role, when put into a leadership role, the team aggregated team performance actually declines. And so the people who are the best at what they do in an individual role often are counterproductive in a managerial role. So the people who raise their hands often aren't the ones that turn out to be the best. The people who are most reluctant often turn out to be the best. And they're most reluctant because they take their role seriously. They know what is entailed by a leadership and what their obligations would be as a leader. Often people who raise their hands are really attracted to, well, the role, the authority, the money and benefits that come with it, sometimes the power and control that are attendant with it as well. And so getting people to speak up or encourage them are one of the things that a good leader should do in mentoring other people. When they come to you and say, oh, I've been thinking about this, applying for this role, but I don't know if I could do it. Either saying, well, I think you could, but maybe you need this first, or by saying, oh, you could do that. And so, yeah, I can. You say, yeah, because you can do this, this, and this, and that's what this role really demands. And I've seen some of your other skills, so yeah, you could do it. So I think you should put your name in. So encouraging people to move forward. And by the way, I just have a little thing here on charisma as well, because we often think of great leaders as being charismatic, and they certainly are in one sense. That is, they're able to sort of get you sort of connected or tied into this vision. But there are different kinds of charismatics out there. They get you tied in because they want you to manipulate you for their own benefit. So there are good and bad charismatics out there. So just because they're glib and are very verbal and can articulate a point of view, it doesn't mean that they have everyone's best interests at heart. So there's different kinds of charismatics. So I just want to, at least in this time, and then I think we'll open it up to you all and have a more engaging conversation than what we've had so far. These are the traits that I've identified. Over the years, I've interviewed probably thousands of employees and probably thousands of executives as well. And back in 2008, I wrote a book called Leading with Kindness. And I interviewed, these were some of the people I interviewed back then. Jack Bogle, he was the founder of Vanguard. He actually became a friend. Mike Crittel, he was the head of Pitney Bowes. He's still a friend. Eileen Fisher, the clothier, and so forth. Dick Parsons, the head of Time Warner, etc. John Pepper, the head of chair of Disney, and so forth. So some of these people I've interviewed many times, over many years. And we actually took their text and we distilled it and came out at that time with 8 traits. But since then, I've sort of magnified it, and we have 15. We have 15 traits that we have identified as essential to leadership. And achievement orientation, compassion, decisiveness, energetic, grateful, humble, humorous, intelligent, open-minded, principled, resourceful, respectful, responsible, self-confident, and sincere. And we can talk about any one of those, if you want to. Do you have any Would you like elaboration on any of these, or do you think any of these are odd, or are we missing some that should be on the list, or do these seem reasonable to you as traits of a leader?
Do you think some is missing? Are very complex, very rich.
We got, yes, all right.
Oh, Sophie.
Hello again.
Support each other, asking questions to speakers.
Not necessarily something that's missing, although I am struggling a little bit to read the ones that are like with the very light text box. But yesterday we had a lecture about where we discussed about how within like entrepreneurial leadership, being decisive is not necessarily a good thing, and it got me thinking. I thought that was a very interesting conception, and it made me wonder what you think about being decisiveness in leadership. Is it necessary to be decisive to be a good leader?
Okay, decisiveness. Yes. But I think it comes in, I think it comes in different flavors. Number one is sometimes you don't have to make a decision when somebody else wants you to. There's a like a time limit. So somebody will say, "Can you do this?" or "Would you do this?" But the deadline's 30 days off. So, you could be decisive in one sense. Yeah, I could do it. Or I could wait to see if circumstances change and not, commit myself too early to a particular action that I might later regret. So sometimes, for instance, I will purposely not respond or not be decisive just because I want to see how things unfold, and then I'll make the decision when the time comes. Also, decisiveness really has to do with being able to sort of convene points of view, consolidating them, conceptualizing them, and then acting on that joint point of view, but being able to take it and actually then make a determination based on the feedback that you receive from other people. And then sometimes in crises, you have to act. I would say I have to act immediately, but even in a crisis, hopefully you've done some pre-planning and have things in place that make sort of the decision easy because you've already coped ahead. You've already thought about what has to get done. But yeah, no, I think people really hate perseverators. Employees just do not like people who are unable to make decisions. And there are different kinds of people who don't make decisions. There are perfectionists who need too much information, and so and they can just never move ahead or off of that because they've never collected all of the information that they need. But most of the times in organizations, the kinds of problems you confront don't have answers. More information won't solve it. And so the idea I actually instruct people is to make good enough decisions. Make sure you have enough information to make a decision, and understand that any new information will be marginal at best and won't change really factors. And in fact, the delay, the speed with which you sacrifice will be antithetical to your purposes. And so make good enough decisions. The other kind of person is the procrastinator, and that's the person who just keeps putting off and putting off until it's a fire drill. And so I think you do want to work with certain kinds of people to get them to act sooner on certain things. And you want to work with other people to say that you have enough information and you have to, I'm trying to think of the word for the kinds of problems that it was like in the 60s when NASA, the space agency, had successes in outer space. The University of California at Berkeley had a big seminar saying, maybe we can solve our social problems through technology and science, that they're all going to be reconciled somehow through evidence-based research. And one of this Horst Riddle, who was there, saying, well, some problems aren't like that. They're not definable in that sense. They're open-ended. There are many paths to a particular outcome, and there are many solutions, and you just have to gather enough information in an unbiased way and proceed based on that. So, but at any rate, I would be surprised if the lecturer said anything differently, but decisiveness is clearly a part of leadership. One CEO, he was the head of a upscale insurance company, and I had talked to him, and he put it this way: we like deliberate decision making around here, but I always remind them that there's a shot clock, which is an allusion to basketball, that you have a certain amount of time. Yes, be deliberate, gather information, but don't take forever, because time also is important. There's a shot clock. Yes. Oh, well, but wait.
I was wondering, Mike,
Yeah.
how this model that you develop, that you can be used on one side to assess the leader for recruiting also good leader, because we have many different traits here,
Yes.
and maybe from the human resource management side, you have to think about how to use this kind of traits, behaviors approach to identify the best leader to recruit in the organization and to promote.
Yes.
So there is also the assessment of leadership for, we can say, career progression, career development. So new metrics, we can say, new criteria that we can follow to adopt a different lens, a different perspective in hiring, but also in promoting leaders.
We have started doing that. So we have this deck of cards, and I'll show you one more slide before time is out, because it gets at some of the other things that I would guess you think are important, but I haven't mentioned yet. And that is, if you're hiring for a job or promoting, what you could do is lay out these cards, what kinds of behaviors, what kind of traits, and what kind of practices would you want this person to exhibit in this particular role. So you use the game as a template against which to measure potential candidates. So
it would be nice to have a game during the job talk.
Wouldn't say, how, here, you do it.
You can have a look at this and ask Mike how the game works after the class. Okay?
I do want to show you that there are these other factors here which get at certain things. And by the way, and they relate to other kinds of leadership diagnostics that we have out there, but it's really, we call it doing, thinking, creating, and relating. I think of it as adaptive intelligence, because there are different ways where adaptive intelligence is succeeding or being effective in one's environment, and you have to have certain capabilities of doing that. And one of those was mentioned at the onset of this session is relating, and that self-awareness, self-control, empathy, those sorts of things that really make up emotional intelligence. But you also have to be a conceptual, analytical, systems thinker, and you have to be imaginative and creative in different ways and create an environment that encourages creativity and innovation in the workplace. And then you have to have a lot of applied knowledge or doing, or psychologists call tacit knowledge, sort of learning through experience and watching others and learning from others.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.